If you need to buy a lawnmower to replace your old one, do not consider buying a new one unless you have an excellent credit score or you have some equity built up, because you're going to pay a lot of money for a good one and only a little bit less for a basic mower. If you're good with your hands or you can follow along with the repair video, consider buying a non-working mower for a fraction of the price of a new one. I could think of a whole lot better things to spend that money on that isn't lawn equipment, like food, drinks, or maybe even a good cigar. In today's video, we're working on a lawnmower and the problem is that it won't start. Now, in the last video, we found out that it has spark and compression and it was only missing the fuel, which of course means the carb was the issue. In this part of the video, we're going to finish installing the carb and find out if the engine will start and run. Then we'll see if the self-propel works, otherwise we'll have another problem to fix. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be a little different, so this might not work on yours. If things aren't working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. In the last video, we found out that this engine does run after putting fuel into the carb, so we opened the carb up only to find that it had a residue inside it that was a result of leaving fuel in the tank for a very long time. After what seemed like an eternity of cleaning and spraying carb cleaner everywhere inside the carb, we finally got it back together, and now we need to install it back onto the engine and see if the engine will start and run on its own. While the carb is off the engine and the fuel line is open, try putting some fuel in the tank or just open the valve if there's already fuel in it and confirm that fuel easily flows out of the line. If it only dribbles out instead of a steady stream, your fuel line could be swollen on the inside, causing poor fuel flow. Now ours is doing just fine, so we're going to install the carb. Once everything has been connected to the carb, lining up all the gaskets, the carb, and the airbox can be a real challenge. However, it's not impossible, so just take your time and be careful. If you have to, it might be a good idea to glue the gaskets in place. That'll make your job a whole lot easier. Also, don't forget to reconnect the breather tube for the emission system to the back of the airbox. Otherwise, the unfiltered air will be sucked into the airbox past the filter and go into the engine. Now, since we had the carb open during the inspection and cleaning, we need to make sure it's not going to leak once gasoline gets to it. For this test, I'm going to add a small amount of gasoline to the tank, make sure the fuel valve is open, and then watch to see if it's going to leak. The strange part is that this could take a few minutes for it to leak, so we're going to have to be patient. Now, after about 5 minutes of waiting, I don't see any gasoline, so I think the carb is good. If you recall, in the first video, I sprayed some lubricant on the nuts on top of the engine, and the reason I did that is because these nuts will sometimes not turn when trying to take them off, and you end up taking out the stud, which is a real pain to deal with sometimes. One problem that Honda mowers seem to have is that over time, the recoil will be slow to rewind, and instead of taking it apart to clean it, the easiest way to clean it is to spray brake cleaner into the spring. Now, resist the urge to use a lubricant because this could backfire on you in the future and cause more problems. After spraying brake cleaner in the spring and working the recoil several times, it seems to be working much better than before. Now at this point, if you want to spray some lube on the bolt where the pulley spins and on the pawls, that'll be fine. Just make sure you don't spray any on the spring. Now after getting the recoil back onto the engine and testing it, there's one more spot I want to lube before we try starting the engine. Now these cables don't last forever, especially when you get water inside them. Now this one is a bit stiff, so to help it out, I'm going to spray some lube down the cable and then work the handlebar. I'm going to do this a couple of times, and this should help keep the cable from breaking anytime soon. So there was something wrong. When it started, it seemed to run fine, but then it started to sputter, and as time went by and as the engine got warmer, it started to sputter more, while the engine speed started to get slower. I think the choke might be stuck based on the black smoke I could see coming out of the muffler. What I'm going to do is start the engine and see what the choke flap does after starting. So I think I know what's wrong. As you can see, the choke flap was not stuck, and when I went to open it, the engine speed went up. That means the throttle plate was wide open, and when I opened the choke flap, it let more air into the engine and allowed it to go faster. Unfortunately, this was my fault. When you find a carb that's been leaking fuel over time, not only does the choke flap get stuck, but also the throttle flap. The worst part was that while I was cleaning the carb, I never noticed that the flap wasn't moving. And sure enough, the throttle is definitely stuck. I'm going to try to spray some carb cleaner on the pivot for the plate. However, it's not doing a great job of getting it to move the way it's supposed to, so I'm going to try to take it apart for a proper cleaning. Now, taking out the throttle plate and shaft is not hard to do. All you need to do is remove the bolt that holds the plate to the shaft and then slide the shaft out of the carb. I can tell this shaft is really stuck because I'm having to use a lot of force to remove it. Once free, I can then spray carb cleaner into the opening for the shaft as well as clean the shaft. For this one, I'm not only going to spray it with carb cleaner, but I'm also going to use a wire brush to remove any gasoline residue on the shaft. Now, after spraying it a few more times, I think it's clean enough, so I'm going to start to reinstall the shaft and the plate. I know it sounds strange, but I might have to make a standardized checklist when working on stuff. That way I won't miss something this simple. Now, once the carb is back together, I'll then install it back onto the engine for hopefully the last test start. So it seems a stuck throttle plate was the problem, and after freeing it, the carb is working just like it's supposed to, and the engine seems to be running very well. Unfortunately, the test run not only let us know the engine starts and runs, but we also found out that the self-propel is not working, otherwise I would have shown it working during the test run. The problem is that the levers to activate the self-propel seem to be stuck. Now, that doesn't mean there's a problem with the self-propel system. It only points to the controls as being the issue. However, that's a whole different problem for a completely different video. As for this part of the video, we're finally able to clean the carb after 2 tries and got the engine running again, saving us from having to buy a cheap aftermarket carb. Another reason why this engine might not be starting is that the compression is too low from the engine because it's worn out. The easiest way to find out is to, of course, do a compression test. If the reading is too low, then the engine will not start, and the only way to fix it would be to rebuild the engine, but that is typically more money than it's worth. Finding a good used engine would be a better solution. So in the end, this mower is now running, and even though we didn't do a compression test on it, if you watch the video on how much pulling power different types of self-propels are capable of, you'll find out how much compression this particular engine has. So my question is, fixing a non-working mower worth the hassle, or would you rather buy one from me after I've gone through it, but at a slightly higher price, of course? Personally, it would depend on how much your time is worth. If you make $100 an hour, then I'd rather buy a used mower instead of spending several hours working on it. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.